Can you talk about first the voter ID law and then this attack on solar and alternative energy sources?
Well, thank you so much, Amy. Yesterday was a great day for voting rights in this country. A federal court in Milwaukee struck down Wisconsin's restrictive voter provisions that were passed at the instigation of Scott Walker. Those voter provisions make it harder for American citizens to vote, impose new restrictions on how you can vote at the polls in terms of ID requirements. And in this case, an independent federal court judge ruled that those provisions were plainly unconstitutional. They were would have a tremendously bad effect on hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin citizens. And he went on to say that in this particular case, there's literally no evidence that voter impersonation is a problem in Wisconsin. There was, really no evidence in recent history that there is some sort of voter fraud plague to warrant this sort of impact on American voters. And so he struck down that law. And that's a bright spot in what really, or a plus, in what really has been a sea of minuses on voting rights over the past few years, not just through the ALEC measures, which ALEC has subsequently tried to disavow, but ALEC's effort back in 2010 to really propagate these voter restrictions was complemented in an unfortunate way, by the Supreme Court's ruling last year to further undermine the Voting Rights Act. And so there's no doubt that voting rights is under assault in this country, but fortunately there is at least one independent judge in Wisconsin, a federal judge, who struck it down just yesterday. That defeat, in a way, for the agenda of many of the ALEC legislators comes in the wake of a big victory for ALEC in Oklahoma, where ALEC is very favored by ALEC politicians there, by ALEC legislators, and by the governor, who was the featured speaker at ALEC's last conference in Oklahoma. And in that case, in the state of Oklahoma, she signed into law a provision that would allow utilities, as you mentioned, to tax solar people who use solar panels on their roofs. And this is a big part of the ALEC agenda, as The Guardian revealed in documents published last December, where ALEC was boasting, in essence, that these provisions were a part of their agenda because they wanted to basically punish what they called free riders or freeloaders, who are people who use solar panels who put energy back into the grid. And so this is a step forward for ALEC's agenda. It's a step backward for our country and for solar energy to have this provision pass in Oklahoma. And it really is, a terrible bill that passed. But we're not surprised in Oklahoma, quite frankly. Oklahoma, if you've ever been to their state capitol, as our research director Nick Sergey has, they have actually, in essence, allowed corporations to buy the Capitol, literally, or at least pay for part of the Capitol. Engraved within the rotunda of the Capitol, Oklahoma, is Halliburton and the names of other corporations that help fund a rebuilding of that Capitol.
And Lisa Graves, can you talk about what the impact of the Wisconsin voter ID ruling will have on other states with similar bills?
Well, I'm hopeful that other judges will take the advice, in essence, the analysis, the really excellent analysis of Judge Lynn Edelman, who's a federal district court judge in Milwaukee, who issued this ruling. It's a really powerful decision. It goes through step by step and really talks about the lack of evidence, the absolute lack of evidence of fraud that would be prevented by these laws. He talks about how the current penalties are so stiff. It's a $10,000 fine and a 3-year prison sentence if someone does impersonate another voter, that's enough of a penalty, and really the lack of foundation for these laws, as well as the impact on people. There was testimony in the case before the judge showing how this law would affect American citizens who want to vote. There are other states, nearly a dozen states, where these voter ID restrictions have passed. And so I'm hoping that in other states, if those provisions are challenged in court, that other judges will look to this really excellent, thorough analysis of the federal court judge in Milwaukee.
And very briefly, Lisa, if you can talk about this merging of your organizations, the Center for Media and Democracy and Progressive.
Well, we're super excited to announce this month that the Center for Media and Democracy and the Progressive Inc. have merged. We've joined forces. We have work to do to integrate our operations, but it's a really exciting time for us. We're both independent, investigative, and media organizations in Madison, Wisconsin. The Progressive has a tremendous history going back to 1909. It has been the place of some of the best writing, I think, in our country.